Hello there, welcome to Editorial, a broadcast from Canada. My name is Sandra Asante. Today we're looking at the Tigrayans needing a path home after Abiy Ahmed's war. So don't go anywhere. I'll be back after the break. You're most welcome back from the break. So after 2 years of genocidal war, a fragile peace is settling on the northern Ethiopian region of Tigray. Local forces led by the Tigray People's Liberation Front TPLF have handed tanks and rockets over to federal army as a gesture of goodwill. Meanwhile, rival Amhara fighters are withdrawing from the region, but it is a fraught recovery on that now needs the central government to act to guarantee the safety of returning refugees. In November 2022, the international community of Red Cross delivered 40 tons of medical supplies to Tigray's capital, Mekelle, yet around 11,000 tons are needed, according to the World Food Programme. Mekelle has reconnected to the national power grid, but much of Tigray remains dark. Banks have resumed service in some areas, but some residents says banks have no money to give. Ethiopian Airlines also resumes flights to Mekelle, but almost 2 weeks after the route was banned. And as the Ethio telecom service also came back online, Tigrayans abroad are only now learning that they lost loved ones months or even years ago. Some people will never know yet after calls for peace by now than 24 civil society organizations in the country. Secret U.S. talks in the Seychelles, a humanitarian ceasefire last month, aid to the region is still only trickling in, and the scale of devastation is just now becoming clear. An estimated 300,000 to 600,000 civilians have been killed in the war, compared to the 6,952 civilians killed in Ukraine since February 2022 as of January 10th, 2023. It is the bloodiest armed conflict since the Syrian civil war was at its peak, and while many of those deaths are attributable to starvation or lack of medical access, up to 60,000 civilians have died due to massacre and bombing alone, according to the unpublished research by Ghent University professor of physical geography, Dan Nelson, which he relayed to foreign policy in a mail. It's almost double of all the fatalities from battles, violence against civilians, explosions, and riots last year in Syria, Afghanistan, and Yemen, Somalia, and Nigeria combined, according to data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. The conflict also created almost 900,000 refugees as at September 2022, or 14% of Tigray's 7 million people, many of whom fled to Eastern Sudan through border known as the Hamdayed and Abdurafi. In addition, there were 2.75 million internally displaced persons in 2022, meaning a total of 52% of Tigray's population fled their home. The life course cannot be restored, but if Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed wants to make Tigray home, those who fled must be welcome home. Not only will this help preserve Tigrayan culture, but it will also help Abiy restore his once strong reputation as a peacemaker who was transforming the new Ethiopia. Other parties involved had been accused of atrocities, yet no one has more blood on their hands than Abiy Ahmed himself, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 for his efforts to achieve peace and international cooperation. The war itself began with Abiy's unconstitutional order in June 2020 to postpone regional elections, citing the pandemic, followed by troops mobilization and open threats to remove Tigrayan leadership after it held elections anyways. The TPLF, the regional militia that ruled Ethiopia from 1991 to 2018, then attacked the northern commander headquarters of the Ethiopian National Defense Force, the ENDF, in Mekelle in the early November 2020, and Abiy announced law enforcement operations that included federal troops going into from the south and allied Eritrean troops going in from the north. The result was 2 years of siege warfare that included cutting the region off from power, internet, banking, food, and medical supplies. Famine was also used as a weapon of war. Women of all ages became victims of genocidal rape, and ethnic massacres were common. In the harmonious sign of his willingness to address a refugee issue, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said in a briefing to members of parliament in late November 2020, weeks after the war began, that there are no women or children among the refugees in Sudan. This was despite the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees reporting that more than 7,000 refugees, women, children, and men had fled Tigray in Sudan in just the first 2 days of the war. Even if he does have a change of heart, it's not enough for Abiy Ahmed to simply hang up the rifles and leave the door open, since many Tigrayans no longer have a home to return to. Not only have houses literally been shelled to dust, but much of Tigray is now inhospitable with little food or medical access. There are now 13 million people across northern Ethiopia in need of food aid, according to the World Food Program. Hospitals have had to, turn people out, and from mid-December 2020 to early March 2021, nearly 70% of medical facilities have been looted. Furthermore, many properties in western Tigray have since been taken over by refugees from Meteke in northwestern Ethiopia or Al-Fashaga, Sudan, following massacre and border disputes in those areas. If Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed wants to guarantee the safety of returnees, this will be hampered by the utter lack of confidence Tigrayans now justifiably have towards the ENDF forces, some of whom have committed atrocities in the region. Nor will Abiy want to empower the TPLF to secure food resources or the like. Instead, he should rely on the World Food Program, which is already jointly working with the U.S. Agency for International Development's Joint Emergency Operation Program to provide emergency food distribution in Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia. But such group operates on the invitation of the federal government. The urgency here is not just humanitarian, but economic. Ethiopia being one of the world's poorest nations with a capital gross national income of $960,000, roughly two-thirds of that of Haiti. Yet its profound poverty masks also vast potential. It remains one of Africa's most largest economies, as well as its second most populous nation after Nigeria. In other words, Abiy has made the same mistake as other dictators such as Chinese President Xi Jinping or North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, squandering profound economic potential for modest gains in political control. Abiy may like to think Ethiopia can always turn to China as an alternative, yet trade with the United States remains key to Ethiopia's economy and further U.S. sanctions will be ruinous. In fact, some experts says that he struck the peace deal for no other reason than to avoid further sanctions and improve the nation's foreign loan eligibility. This makes sense, especially since the federal government estimates it would take $20 billion to rebuild Tigray and other war-torn regions, which is a whopping 18% of the country's entire GDP. This is why welcoming back displaced Tigrayans is more than just a moral cause. Rebuilding the economy regionally and nationally needs human capital. Unfortunately, the infrastructure that will help create a space for people to return will also establish the kind of stability that's great for local economy. This includes building hospitals and schools as well as creating employment pathways for returnees and support network to help people settle back in to contribute to the nation's growth. But this would include great measures as transportation aid, housing grants, job training, including efforts to build workforces made up of mixed ethnicities to encourage ethnic cooperation and therapy as well. So those are medium-term solutions. However, focus on the last three of the so-called 4 hours of refugee return, which is the repatriation, reintegration, rehabilitation, and reconstructions. So the first step, repatriation, will require emergency assistance such as aid packages, cash grants, and delivery of agricultural tools. Even before this, refugees will only voluntarily return once the federal government has established certain security conditions, which not only includes the cessation of combat, but the re-establishment of police forces, the enactment of legislation to defend property rights and address right abuses, the rebuilding of roads and clearing of rubble, and the repair of water and sanitation systems. So without these measures, many refugees literally cannot return home. These efforts should include the participation and guidance of community leaders in partnership with established aid organizations as opposed to ad hoc groups, namely partnership with the UN Development Program, the World Bank, UNICEF, and the World Food Program. Putting Ethiopia back together will take decades, and the clock has already been ticking. As multiple studies shows, refugees are less likely to return home as time passes, particularly younger ones who are most vital for the future of an economy. Unfortunately, none of this seems to be what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has in mind. Eritrean troops and forces from Ethiopia's Amhara region remain in the areas. They may have been withdrawn from Shire, but Amhara forces still controls the west of the Lemti, Dima, and some Waridas around Alamata in the south. Food and medical access remains scarce in some areas. Residents are still unsafe. This could be by design, as Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed uses a formal peace to avoid sanctions while allowing Eritrean forces to do his dirty work without getting his fingerprints all over the crime scene. If he is serious about ending the war, Abiy has to actually work towards building the peace he agreed on the paper. And even if all he wants is power, he should think seriously about the consequences of holding it in an environment as brittle as the one he has created. We hope that all the refugees can return home if God help us. Thank you so much for joining us today for the editorial. My name is Sandra Asante. Justice for all.